Hello, this is Jon Speelman with a roundup of the last round of the Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis, Missouri. A dramatic final round in which Magnus Carlsen, after drawing his first 9 games, caught up by winning a second game in a row, this time against Vachier-Lagrave. We'll look at that. Meanwhile, Liren, who had been the leader before the final round, flirted with danger against Vachier-Lagrave. But finally drew a rook ending fairly easily. Let's start with Vachier-Lagrave against Carlsen. So, here we are, e4. Carlsen's in the World Championship match. He was playing d takes c6. This time he took with the b pawn. He did earlier this tournament, I think, as well. d4 takes, queen takes, and the move f6. If you go knight f6, e5, knight d5, then you can start playing castles, bishop g7, queen h4, which is quite a dangerous line. It's not a line that you'd want to play, especially not against Vachier-Lagrave, I think. So he played f6, which blocks the diagonal, obviously, and keeps the centre more intact. d6, c4, and he played c5, Carlsen. So he's prevented c5, and so he's kept his centre nicely intact, and he does have the 2 bishops. Of course, they're not working yet. Bishop g7, b3. He could possibly have played f5 here, but it would have been bit odd. Knight h6, knight c3. So he can't castle at the moment because of queen d5 check, forking these 2 guys. But I thought he'd play knight f7, but he actually played rook b8. Maybe this is a better move. Maybe it stops white from playing bishop b3 for the moment because of knight g4 possibly. And he's going to come here in a minute and prophylactically defend the e-pawn and maybe bring his rook over, as actually happened in the game. Bishop d2, castles, h4. h4 looked like the right thing to do. Don't know if you have to. So black has this nice centre, but I mean at the moment he isn't very active. And Carlsen played the nice move rook b7, which basically protects this, and it sort of thinks about coming over here someday. But mainly it protects this pawn, I'd say. g5, you don't want to take that or you'll make a mess of your position. You won't, well, I mean you might be able to keep the pawn for a bit, but it would be very ugly. And he went knight e5, queen g3, king h8. You need to get the king out of the way, because f4 is coming in a minute, and you don't want h6 to come, obviously, with the king on h8. Rook g8, rook e3, knight c6. Now he went queen f2. I thought he might go queen h4, but actually I was completely wrong, because this position is pretty repulsive for, I mean, I'm not sure if you go here, is pretty repulsive for white. He just goes here and this pawn's being rounded up. This pawn's defended sufficiently with this rook coming nicely across, and the knight's coming into d4, and it just isn't a good position. So he played queen f2 as a better move. f5 Magnus played. Time I thought, why not just pawn takes pawn, and that would have been the best move. Vachier-Lagrave played knight f3, which is actually a mistake because of this very fine move, and e5. And suddenly Carlsen is very active, and he has a beautiful square on here for his knight. So if bishop g5, you just take it, take rook g3. I think you can go queen h5, pawn takes pawn, knight to here, which threatens to win immediately. And then you get in bishop f5. If pawn up, check, takes f7. You don't play rook takes f7 because of rook takes threatening mate. You just take this rook and take this pawn, and you're an infinite amount of material up, or certainly enough to win. Vachier-Lagrave found a much better move, rook d3. Very crafty move. It threatens knight takes e5 using the pin, and Carlsen had a long think and actually played pawn takes bishop. Queen f8 would have been quite a sensible move here as well. I'm just finding I've probably got some vague notes about this. Yeah, bishop g5 and just rook f7. And this is just much better for black. I mean, h4, h5 is something you don't want to have played now. If takes, you go takes, I think, and you've just got a wonderful position. Basically, white is almost busted here. So that might have been a more sensible way to play, but Carlsen realised he could take the money, and he did. I think if pawn hits pawn, you can play this and check, and that's the end of the game. So you went h6, pawn hits pawn. I mean, engines actually want you to play queen e7 and to play the exchange down, but it's very natural to take the money. So this position, well, it should be winning. It's a whole, two pieces are better than a rook, but it's still very complicated, and Carlsen had to navigate quite a lot of difficulties before he actually won. b4 gets the queen active. I mean, rook takes at d4 wasn't ridiculous, but it would probably have lost in the end. Now he went back. And there are lots of lines now in which you play rook takes bishop and give check on a black square. So, for instance, if we went check here, queen takes pawn, rook takes this, then white is already better, because rook takes gets mated after queen e5, and rook to there check, and in fact rook takes queen, queen e8 mate, and so you have to take back with the queen, excuse me, sorry, to take back with the queen, and then this happens, and you're grovelling to try to draw. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. With this a pawn still on, you'll probably lose. So obviously a little bit of care is required. And he didn't do that, of course. He played queen e3. Basically keeps on pinning the rooks, and also controlling the central black squares is very important. Queen d6 was a good move. It's quite a crafty move. I don't know if it's a good one though, because it gives up the black squares. It looked like an excellent idea at the time. Check here, and Carlsen found the excellent idea of just retreating his queen. He's controlling these two key squares, and he's threatened to play knight e2 check. And knight e2 check at the moment would be winning immediately, because if rook takes queen takes, there's no perpetual. After rook takes bishop, you don't control e5. And if king h2, you play queen h4 mate, and if king f1, you play knight g3 check and queen e1 check. So say white played a completely stupid move, you'd go here, check here, check here, and in fact you can just play knight takes rook, but you can also give mate in two moves, like this. So this was an excellent idea. Vachier played queen h5, but now the queen's slightly off course. Rook g5 wouldn't have been terribly clever because of either queen e8 or possibly even rook e8. Rook g6 was suggested in the stream, and it's not a bad move, but Carlsen found probably a better one, queen e3 again. Somehow the queen's not at all good in h5 now, and you're... I don't know, what are you actually threatening? Never quite sure what you're threatening. It's almost Zugzwang, I'd say. He played... I don't know if you're not threatening knight e2 check yet. Maybe rook g6 would be a good move next, and then king g7, and then you'd start to get complete control. And basically, well, it's an awful position. You play queen h4, and now knight e2 check is completely winning. and king h1. If king h2, I think you play queen to here check is completely disastrous. King h3, there's actually knight g1 mate, which is very pretty. And if king h1, you go knight g3 check. Can't go to h2 because of... Can you go to h2 here? What's the best way to do it then? Is there something completely over? Trying to see a completely winning move here. I certainly can't see a completely winning move because if knight f5 there's queen f4. I might have to ask an engine for a second. Knight e2 check and queen a1. Sorry, okay, so yeah, knight e2 check. Sorry about that. And check. Check, take, queen takes rook check. So, he was completely busted. Sorry, there are so many lines. He actually played king h1 here, queen checks, and now he resigned because king h2 gets mated after queen to g1 to h1, and if rook f1 you play knight checks. King here, queen checks. You don't play knight takes rook because of rook takes bishop would check, do you? Knight takes rook, I'm not sure. This is at least a nuisance. Maybe it's winning after. Rook takes is perpetual and king takes white as this check. And many, many checks. Probably not enough, actually. I think the king can probably stomp its way down to about f4 and it'll all be over. But you wouldn't want to do that. You just play... Stop. I'm confused again. This is very bad. So knight takes would win anyway. Queen e3 check he played. Sorry, that's right. And queen e3 check just wins completely because if rook up, now you give check. Rook to there, knight to there, check. King to there, queen takes queen mate. So you don't even have to get involved in white trying to give perpetual check. So the game ended. I'm sorry to have been so dopey at the end of that. There were many much checks, and after this he resigned. I believe he resigned after queen e3 check, I think is where he gave up. Yep, that's where he stopped. So that was that one. Now there are two more games I'm going to show you. There's Ding against Mamediarov. I'm just going to go through very quickly. This is a very difficult position, although it's almost completely symmetrical. Bishop h6 would have been sensible, and this was a terrible move. Still been sensible to play bishop h6, I think. Knight to here, queen c5. I guess Ding thought he was going to equalise, but in fact now he's in some danger. He gets a position where if rook takes pawn, rook to the 7th would be okay, but you just go king f7. And black is better in this rook ending because of these bad pawns. Maybe not so much, because these pawns are bad as well. It says minus port wonders at the engine. Anyway, Ding eventually drew this, so that's how he dropped half a point as compared to Carlsen. And the other decisive game was Giri against Nepomniachtchi. And this is Nepomniachtchi being tired, basically, I think, or wanting to get the tournament over. And just doing something very silly. I thought this position looked quite good for black because white's short of tempi, but in fact he's just in time. So you're threatening to take on c4, but black has this nice move blocking the line, and he actually took this way. This could have led to take, 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 take. Rook takes b7. If we can go pawn takes pawn as well. Maybe pawn takes pawn is interesting actually. Now then probably just wondering about this move, but probably you can go, because you're going to be threatening to go bishop b8. Maybe you can go here now and then you're threatening bishop b2. Okay, it's interesting though, I didn't think of that, I thought of b7. Let me just ask about pawn takes pawn. I'll ask the engine again. Rook a8, bishop b8, bishop b2, doesn't like it. Or rook a8, rook c1, bishop f5, I guess. You got two very good bishops. Okay, but you can go b7, which is what I thought. Pawn equals queen. Takes, king h2. Rook back is the only move. And in a moment we're going to get an ending which is probably about equal. So, sorry, I've still got the engine I didn't want to have. So let's go back to the main line. This is what actually happened. Queen d8 is also quite a good move here actually, with the idea that if knight d4 you take, this, I didn't see this, an engine told me, and do this. That's quite a clever idea. What happened was that they played these moves. Well, this should be completely equal. You could play h5 or you could play bishop f8. I mean, there's a threat of rook to the 8th check and bishop h6, which is always a nuisance. May or may not work, but it's something you have to worry about. I mean, I was thinking, but you can play h5 is one thing you can do. Check, takes, bishop, and if bishop, that's just bad after rook c8, you just lose. Or you can also just play prophylactically bishop f8, defending this guy. If rook to the 8th, takes here, black's absolutely fine. In fact, he went rather careless, bishop c3. He couldn't go king g7 because of bishop to here check, winning material. Would have been a pretty dopey way to play. So he had to go. Don't know if bishop f6 was a good idea or not. Maybe he could have gone queen a2, but anyway. Well, queen takes rook and rook checks and rook takes bishop occurred to me, but it isn't going to be any good for black. Take. If you had a pawn on e6 as well, it'd probably be fine. But here you go queen d6, and you're teeing up very quickly to go e4, e5, and it's not going to be a good position for black at all. It might be just about playable, I don't know. Engine will say +2, I think. No, +1, okay. Anyway, he went here. So black's got the better pieces. Swapped queens, and Nepo basically switched off here. And they played some moves. It got to be rather an interesting ending though, that's why I'm showing you really. I did a little analysis of it after the game. Lots of moves were played. He just thought nothing was happening at all. Would have been quite sensible actually to go here, and if here, just to go here. Basically, if white checks, you just go. You go here. If he checks, you just go king f6, and nothing happens because there's a defend the pawn. After this, you go here, and he can move. You just go back. And absolutely nothing happens at all. Just isn't even really very interesting. So that would have been a very sensible thing to do, but he just didn't believe anything was going on. Now it's more dangerous because king g5 might happen. And this is already a dangerous position. I thought e4 might be possible, but I think you can just take after king g5 you're okay. Is that right? There was a funny line. that I'm going to try to find where you put your king on h7 at the end of a line, which wasn't at all obvious to. So oh yes, that's right. So you're on king g5, check here, and actually could have taken here, gone here, I believe. Oh no, could he have? I think he can take this actually, and despite appearances nothing's really happening, is the claim. I think that is the claim, because if check, king here, if you go e5 you can go rook g3 and you've got an h-pawn, so you take this. But now there's this move, and check and king f8 and you win this pawn, and the game ends in a draw immediately. So that would have been quite clever. It's not obvious. It wasn't obvious to me at all at the time. But it went rook takes pawn, check, king here. That's a 2 question mark move, after which he's losing, because the g-pawn drops off and he just doesn't have a chance. He should have gone king f7, h4, rook f1, rook checks, king e6, and basically you can't win this pawn without the king being in front, and it's okay. Let me go back. Let me go back to move 65. Rook a6 check. That's what I wanted to say. If king g7. King g7. And there was some rather nice line. e4 takes, king to here. It looks in this position as though you're going to get rook's pawn and bishop's pawn against king, which is going to be unpleasant, but there's this wonderful move. And this move just draws, because if rook takes g6 you play rook takes f4, and otherwise you sit there. And if check you go back, and nothing's really happening. King takes pawn, rook takes pawn is just a draw, f5 doesn't help either. So it's just an immediate draw. Very difficult to see, I think. Somehow, you sometimes see this motif, but with, that would have been difficult to see. Anyway, let's just go back to the main line, see what actually happened. 2 question marks. Now if king f7, you just go rook f6 check, and you take. He should have tried h4 here, but he's lost. Rook to here, rook takes. King to here is best, I think, king here. And you get this f-pawn. And, for instance, I thought king g7 maybe to go to h6. But you're losing quite easily. Rook to there, e6. And you're going to... White is first by a couple of tempi. You're threatening to queen the pawn already. So this is winning. And what actually happened, he didn't even do that. He went rook takes, king to there, and resigned. Because white is going to take an f5, and he's going to have 2 pawns against 1 with his rook on a good square. And that's completely hopeless. So that was a shame for Nepomniachtchi, for Nepo, after he'd been one of the people joined second before the final round. And the outcome was that I'm just going to tell you the final scores, which is why I'm fiddling around at this moment, was that Ding and Carlsen made 6.5 out of 11, Anand and Karyakin 6, Mamedyarov, Giri and Caruana and Nepo 5.5, Nakamura 5, and Vachier-Lagrave 5, and Aronian and So 4.5. And they're playing off. Ding and Carlsen are playing off tomorrow we're told that this is going to be at 10 a.m. local time, which is 4 a.m. GMT, I believe. So 5 o'clock in the afternoon in England. Is that right? No, 3 o'clock GMT. Sorry, I think 3 o'clock GMT, which is 4 o'clock in England. I think I may have put that wrongly on the stream. If I have, then I will amend it now. So I will be commentating. They're playing rapid play games, and then if necessary blitz, and if necessary after that, after Armageddon, heaven help us. And there we are. So a very tough day for all the guys, and very tough tournament is over, apart from a playoff where Carlsen, given his track record in